Hello and welcome to Stand in the Gap. I particularly welcome you if you're watching this program for the very first time, and I deeply thank you if you're a turning friend of Stand in the Gap. I'm Sam Rohrer, and here on this program, Isaac Crockett and I tackle the most important issues affecting you, the American citizen, the American family, the American governmental system, and the American church. Now, so far, we've dealt head-on with such issues as immigration and open borders, gun control, God and the Second Amendment, the opioid crisis, and how to successfully bridge the racial divide. And on this program, we don't just talk around issues, we don't waste time shaping symptoms, we go right to the root, looking through the four-phase lens of a biblical worldview, which recognizes these four essential truths. First, there is God. Secondly, there was a creation, an act of God. Thirdly, there was a fall where sin entered the world precipitated by the devil. And then lastly, there is redemption secured by Jesus Christ. Here we address the most pressing cultural issues of the day from a biblical and constitutional perspective. And we follow a simple approach capable of solving any problem facing our nation or any nation by applying a deliberate, biblically based diagnostic process consisting of four clarifying questions. One, what does the Bible say, either in command or in principle? What does the Constitution guarantee or prescribe? What does freedom require of you and of me? And then what does justice demand from civil authority? So if you want to know the truth, if you want to know what God thinks, if you want to make sense of all of the nonsense around us, stay with us for the next 30 minutes as together we walk through the darkness of today's seemingly unsolvable dilemmas into the light and the freedom of moral truth. Now, today's program centers on the national and even international concern of what I call a developed gladiator attitude, a scorched earth approach to modern political life and campaigns, often referred to as negative campaigning, where lies, distortions, arrogance, and pride dominate the process. The jettisoning of historic civility and principled restraint is all but destroying what William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, what he referred to in his 1680 address there as a holy experiment in self-government under God. But lest you think that this modern callous and arrogant attitude of one person to another, so obvious today in the American political process, is limited only to political campaigns, I submit that there's a deeper societal and cultural condition, a condition that's not unique to this 21st century. The condition is real. It must be identified and carefully considered and rebuked if freedom is to endure in our culture capable of nurturing and building up rather than destroying and tearing down. Now, to substantiate my assertion that the fight to oppose arrogance, corruption, and the gladiator attitude in politics and society is not something that's new, let's just watch a short clip of Jimmy Stewart as he plays the role in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and here engages in debate on the floor of the U.S. Senate as the gentleman from Montana, where he leads the fight against corruption in his political system of that day. So his goal then, and ours now, is to return civility, honor, and fidelity to this holy experiment in self-restrained self-government. Following this clip, Isaac and I will engage this critical topic with our special guest, Mr. Jeff Coleman, author of the recent book on this subject, With All Due Respect, Restoring Civility to Politics and Society.
I guess this is just another lost cause, Mr. Payne. All you people don't know about lost causes. Mr. Payne does. He said once they were the only causes worth fighting for. And he fought for them once. For the only reason any man ever fights for them. Because of just one plain, simple rule. Love thy neighbor. And in this world today full of hatred, a man who knows that one rule has a great trust. You know that rule, Mr. Payne. And I loved you for it just as my father did. And you know that you fight for the lost causes harder than for any others. Yes, you even die for them. Like a man we both knew, Mr. Payne. You think I'm licked? You all think I'm licked. Well, I'm not licked. And I'm gonna stay right here and fight for this lost cause, even if this room gets filled with lies like these. And the Taylors and all their armies come marching into this place. Somebody will listen to me.
Now stay with us through this break as Isaac Crockett and myself return and we introduce our guest, the Honorable Jeff Coleman, on this very important topic of with all due respect.
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history, or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment or warning signs? The pastor, commentator, or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. With hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide, a website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution, and a growing network of statewide chapters leading the conversation in cities, small towns, and state capitals. Educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Well, welcome back to Stand in the Gap, and we're thrilled to have you with us today as we get engaged in a topic that I know concerns all of you. It concerns us, and it's what I am calling, negative campaigning or scorched earth campaigning. And we have a special guest with us today. I want to introduce right now. His name is Honorable Jeff Coleman. He is the president of Churchill Strategies and the author of a new book that he's written entitled With All Due Respect. And I'm tagging on to it, Restoring Civility to the Political Scene and to Society. And with that, I want to welcome you. Jeff, pleasure to have you on board.
Great to be here. Thank you, Sam.
Now, Jeff, you and I go way back. For full disclosure, may as well just introduce us a little bit. You and I served together in the Pennsylvania House for a few years. And so I've been in office, you've been in office. Actually, the theme of this whole discussion, we've been on the outside and we've been on the inside.
We have.
And matter of fact, again, for full disclosure, you ran my campaign for governor in 2010. And we walked through this issue. We spent a lot of time in prayer, a lot of time in discussion, saying, what should we do? How should we respond to this cultural push to just destroy the enemy? And we had to deal with some very important issues. We're going to get into that and why you wrote the book and all that. But if you could, from an overview perspective, I used the word negative campaigning, and I've used just a bit ago scorched earth campaigning because it tends to describe almost what it is. But how do you describe this issue that we're talking about right now?
Well, we can talk about methods and tactics, which are television ads and direct mail pieces and robocalls that come at 4 in the afternoon or at midnight with information that comes labeled as helpful, useful information to help you make an informed decision about how you should vote. The reality, though, of negative campaigning is that it conceals the whole story. It's never the entire story. It is a piece, a shred, maybe a thinly veiled bit of evidence that connects the person, the target of that attack, to some event in their life. Now, the First Amendment protects political speech even if it is 100% false. So not every negative campaign even contains a shred of truth. You may have someone who gave a donation to an organization that gave a donation that gave another donation and was connected to a shadow group in Washington, D.C., which connected them to Nancy Pelosi or Donald Trump.
Well, what you're explaining is something that is very complicated.
Yeah.
And I think the point is that as an observer watching this whole thing, you're only seeing a bit and piece.
Right.
But you're seeing pieces of it that are tailored to destroy.
Right.
Now, if I could, let me just, here's a definition from Collins Dictionary, just a very simple one. They said, political campaigning in which a politician or party focuses on criticizing the opponent more than focusing on their own positive qualities. And I found it interesting that in that dictionary, they added a comment and they said that most voters are already very tired of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's very, very clear. Now, if I could, I made another definition.
Yep.
Try this on for size. See if this works for you. I said this: scorched earth politics, as we're describing here, is a gladiator-style approach to life where winning at any cost is the guiding principle, and where the attitudes of civility, honor, respect, and love your neighbor as yourself are rejected. That sound okay to you?
I think it's a lot more accurate than the original. I mean, there's the official definition on the books, which is, if you're weighing the amount of money that you're spending more attacking than you are promoting, which is what that first definition said. But really, when you take when you're not just looking at dollars in your exam, you have to examine motive, which is you have to agree to the kind of negative attacks that people are leveling against their opponents. You have to suspend everything you believe, if you're a decent person, about how to treat people, about what they taught you in kindergarten, all of the polite niceties, please, thank you, all of that, it's gone.
Well, on that order, I just have to say, Jeff, I did read your book with all due respect, and I disagreed with everything on it. It was no, it was not a waste of time. I really enjoyed it. I was just joking. But with that, it did bring a lot of things to light. As you're mentioning now, it goes kind of deeper than most of us could even think. And most of our listeners are not running a political campaign, right. So they might be thinking, well, this doesn't affect me. How big of an effect does this have? What's the scope of this? Who's it affecting, and are there people who aren't affected by it then?
So what your viewers might be thinking is, well, when I get one of those negative campaign pieces, I just throw it in the garbage. Or when I see one of those TV ads, I just leave the room. But there's usually, the way that political campaigns design these ads is they're not designed for people to do a long intake, sitting down, reflectively with a piece of mail and reading them. They're looking at it and saying, what is the 3-second impression, the 4-second impression? So before you walk out of the room, or before you flip to the B side, or before you throw that mailer out, what was the impression you got? So that's why we take a picture of a person and you distort it. You put filters over it, you use Photoshop tricks, you make all kinds, and then you make words that are completely exaggerating the character of the individual to be the largest or the loudest on that mail piece or that announcer that comes over on the television ad. So what you're getting cumulatively after beating someone with $1 million worth of attack ads in the course of 10 days, you're getting an impression. And they may say, well, I don't believe any of that stuff. But you know what they do say? Reasonable doubt. I don't know if I like him as much as I did. And then what the negative campaign tactician wants you to say is, well, they're all the same, which is not true.
In that same light, then, how affected are the American people by this? In other words, in your book, you talked about some Gallup polls and things that talk about what we want in a candidate. Right. And I think most of us say, well, we don't want him to trash talk, but when they interviewed them for the Gallup poll, it became obvious that some of these things really are reflecting the culture. Our politicians are reflecting who we are.
We don't want people to trash talk unless it's our guy or woman for our cause. We want people to act civilly. We want people to be respectful and abide by these rules until they are advocating for us. So we weigh these issues saying, well, but they're pro-life. They're going to appoint Supreme Court justices that share our values. They're going to, and I'm not shadowily just speaking about the president. In general, we make excuses for people who put on our jersey, who are on our team. And we say, well, we can explain those things away. And I just don't think that's the standard that especially people of faith, specifically Christians, can accept as the standard.
And Jeff, I want to go there right now with you, because on all of the issues we deal with, cultural issues, there is a perception that the general public will have and how they describe.
Right.
But we as believers understand that there's a spiritual component that really undergirds, because you've touched on attitudes. You already touched on the concept that there's a standard that Christians have, that you mentioned it, set aside. Let's go there and talk about that now. Let's weave together here what we perceive to be the problem, if we could, and work in the spiritual component, because that really is foundational.
Well, the diagnosis of the problem to me is that in society we have suspended the idea that the founding generation embodied in everything that they did, all of their deliberations, which was, if someone is made in the image of God, made by God, they are worthy of honor, dignity, respect, just by virtue of being human. Out of that then flows all of this writing from Jefferson and Washington, that founding generation, about the ideal. Not that they always practice it, but the ideal for how then we treat people. So we have this elaborate set of rules, for example, on how to engage in public debate that extended to how people campaign for political office. We fast forward to the era in which we're living now. All of those rules have virtually been erased. And we say, we don't have to acknowledge that someone is made in the image of God. And maybe God made a mistake. So this person, by virtue of their conduct or what they believe, is not worthy of respect.
And what you're saying there, I mean, again, we're not going to go into this whole area right now, but the concept that we are made in the image of God, we talk about biblical worldview in this program. There is God, there was a creation and an act of God. God created man. Man is sacred. Our Declaration of Independence recognizes that our rights come from God, the Creator. But when that concept of God as Creator is set aside, then a lot of things happen. In our last program, we talked about successfully crossing the racial divide. We came to the same point. If you do not believe that God made all men sacred before Him, then a lot of things get in the way. Color gets in the way, or differences get in the way. And that brings me to a point we like to go to, is saying, we're talking about an issue. More often than not, the issues become our symptoms, really. And you tinker with the symptoms and you never fix the problem. I came up with a definition of the root problem. Can I try this on you?
Yeah, please.
I said this, and it's in keeping with what you said. The root problem we're talking about here is the selfish and short-term attitude to living, where God's sovereign will is either unknown or set aside and rejected, and Christ's admonition to love your neighbor as yourself is rejected.
Oh, yeah.
So that takes right to the heart of the spiritual.
It does.
But that's also maybe ties in what you're talking about. There's a standard that we end up setting aside. If we say we are a Christian, if we say we know our God, we have to set that aside to engage in this kind of scorched earth negative campaigning.
So I think what we have to do in situations like this, where we say things like, God is in control. And people post that on Facebook, they post memes and pictures. God is in control of everything, except politics, where He needs my help to determine. So we say we trust God with the outcome of the election. But if the election goes the other way, He is no longer in charge, and now it's time for us to pick up the weapons of the world, which looks more like a wrestling match, right? The theatrical kind, and pick up all of those weapons, which is manipulation, which is deceit, which is half-truths, because we say we need to use, if we're going to fight fire, we fight it with fire. In the gospel, Jesus walks into all this and says, you no longer need to fight that way. To many Christians, though, that feels like we're disarming. And what I'm trying to say is, if you believe that God is sovereign over all of these events, that should communicate a certain kind of calm and freedom from anxiety, that when you look on a Christian who is in the arena and they are not out of control and using name-calling. I mean, that's what we're aiming for.
These are good points, and very biblical, I guess you could say. So where are we as Christians losing this? Where are we being taught that it's okay to pick up the the carnal weapons of warfare and go after somebody to fight fire with fire?
Well, in the American church, we were convinced, I think rightly so, in the 1980s, moral majority days, that Christians could no longer be on the sidelines of these issues, that there were issues like the sanctity of life, like what does culture and society look like, and we were withdrawing our influence from that arena. Then we began to find out that we weren't winning enough elections just by Christians showing up. So we learned about direct mail, and we learned how to target. We learned how to message, which was fine because it was Christians reaching Christians. But then we began to hire people who had a marginal view of kind of what the ethics were for Christians to be involved in politics. And we began to adopt a generation of political consultants and bring them into the family. Say, we'll give you what you want. We'll give you God. We'll give you pro-life stuff. We'll give you Christians in office. Just try it our way for a little bit. And it became hope and fear. Campaigns that were based largely on fear, motivating Christians to run, and the hope was almost gone. And we're almost in the hopeless phase of politics.
Jeff, I mean, we could go a long way on this. I think you put that together well. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to cut away right now for a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk further with our guest, Honorable Jeff Coleman, the author of the recent book, With All Due Respect, and why he wrote this, a little bit of his background, what motivated him, and what he hopes to gain, and what we collectively hope to gain by focusing on this most important issue. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap. And as we've been talking with our good friend, Jeff Coleman, we just want to kind of go back to him now. And we were talking about your book, With All Due Respect. We've talked with both you and Sam both about some of the battles you've had running for office, even being in office. And I'm sure we could talk a lot more about it and some of your cronies and things that did happen, right or wrong. But could we just get a little bit of a testimony from you of how God has worked in your life to lead you to where you were, to lead you to work with someone like Sam, and just why you would write this book, With All Due Respect, which does come at such a timely, current issue in our culture?
Well, at 42, my thinking about politics and the reasons that you get into politics has probably changed a lot. I mean, I was a young teenager just off the mission field. My dad's a pastor, and we were in the Philippines during the People Power Revolution, the overthrow of a dictator in a peaceful revolution. But you can't be someone living in that culture, be totally absorbed with politics and come out with an indifference to it. So I came home just wanting to run for office because I saw that was where the center of action was, where I could make a difference. I think, though, my advice to my younger self, I think, would be today to not aim for the position, not aim for the title. Just be willing to say to God, wherever you want me to be, whenever you want me to be there, and you'll find out that you're not wrecking relationships and taxing your family and your friends as much as you could and do when you're pursuing an office. My convictions about negative campaigning were always there. We ran, in my first race, a clean campaign, defeated an incumbent who had been in office almost all my lifetime. And in a Democratic seat, I was a Republican, and it was 2/3 Democrat. So it was a miracle by any stretch, anyone looking at that race, seeing that only God could have done this. But then fast forward to when I left the House, retired from the House, and then started helping people get into the political arena. We sat down with Sam and other candidates and said, look, if you want to do this, there's a way that's consistent with what you believe. You do not have to run campaigns the way they run campaigns. You can present yourself in the best possible way, get involved in debate, legitimate debate on the issues, but leave families, leave personalities, leave persona alone, and don't make it simply an act of self-promotion. In that, trusting God for the outcome, you'll have candidates that are so compelling that people want to vote for them. We don't always win, but we're not called to win. We are called to be faithful in the way that we conduct the campaigns.
And Jeff, I think, you're echoing my thoughts as well. God brought us into contact, and we were both in the House, both felt that God called us to run.
Yeah.
And we both had very similar entrees, did not get involved in the negative. And God blessed, I think, not in spite of, but in cause of. Now, we're gonna have to finish this program, and can you stay with us for another one?
I would love it.
Okay, but in the last minute here, what do you hope to gain by the writing of this book?
Well, I hope, first of all, that people recognize that politics doesn't have to be the way that it is. To the Christian, to the person who is where the Holy Spirit resides in their heart, I hope they feel a slight responsibility, in fact, a great responsibility, to be light in a very, very dark arena. That when they walk to the polls on Election Day, that the engagement is a joyful engagement. I'm going to vote. I'm trusting the outcome to God. I don't have to be mean-spirited. I don't have to call the talk show. I have an outlet for my anger.
But Jeff, what you're describing is going to be part of the solution, ladies and gentlemen, in a moment. And we come back in the next part of the program, because this attitude that you heard from Jeff is biblical, and it can work for you, regardless if you're running for office or if you're at home. Now, if you're watching the program and you've not communicated with us, could I ask you to write to us at 83 West Main Street, Suite 3, Elverson, Pennsylvania, 19520, and that address will be on the screen here in just a moment. But you're listening to Stand in the Gap today. I'm Sam Rohrer, Isaac Crockett, and our special guest, the Honorable Jeff Coleman, on our theme of basically negative advertising and restoring, not advertising, but campaigning and restoring civility to society and political affairs. Now, be with us. Join us next week for part 2 of Solutions and Causes. How did we get here, and how do we get out of here on this issue?